The day Thomas Sullivan told me our 50-year marriage was over, I wasn't even granted the dignity of a proper conversation. It happened over breakfast, our usual Saturday morning ritual of coffee and the crossword puzzle. He cleared his throat, set down his mug, and said he was leaving me for his 32-year-old executive assistant, Megan. 5 decades of love, sacrifice, and building a life together, dismissed between bites of toast. I sat frozen, my coffee growing cold, as he explained that he'd already found an apartment and would be moving out that weekend. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. What Thomas didn't know as he walked out our door for the last time was that I, Eleanor Sullivan, had spent the last 30 years not just as his devoted wife, but secretly becoming an investment powerhouse in my own right. He had no idea that while he built his telecommunications company, I was carefully constructing a financial empire that would soon allow me to deliver the most unexpected lesson of his life. This is the story of how I lost my husband, found my strength, and ultimately purchased the very company he valued more than our marriage. I met Thomas Sullivan in 1974 at Northwestern University. I was studying business administration, one of only a handful of women in the program, while he was pursuing electrical engineering, with dreams of revolutionizing communication technology. We met in the campus library, where I was working part-time. Thomas would come in late every Tuesday night to study, always requesting obscure technical journals that required my assistance to locate. "You're the only person who never complains about finding these," he told me after weeks of our little routine. His smile was warm, genuine, and I found myself looking forward to Tuesday evenings. Our first date was at a small diner off campus. Thomas talked excitedly about the future of telecommunications. His passion was infectious, and I found myself caught up in his vision of a world where people could connect instantly across vast distances. What struck me most was how he listened when I shared my own ambitions, to break into financial management at a time when women were still fighting for a place at the table. "You're going to be extraordinary, Eleanor," he said with such conviction that I believed him. We married in 1975, just after graduation. Both sets of parents thought we were rushing, but when you know, you know. We rented a tiny apartment in Chicago, where Thomas took an entry-level position at a telecommunications firm, while I landed a job as an administrative assistant at an investment company. It wasn't the financial analyst position I'd hoped for, but I was determined to work my way up. The early years were lean but happy. We saved every penny toward Thomas's dream of starting his own company. On weekends, our small kitchen table disappeared under blueprints and business plans. I would sit beside him, offering insights on financial projections and market strategies I'd gleaned from observing the executives at my firm. "We're going to build something significant together," Thomas would say, squeezing my hand across our plans. "Sullivan Communications will be our legacy." In 1980, Thomas took the leap. With our modest savings and a small business loan, Sullivan Communications was born. We converted our apartment's spare bedroom into an office. I continued working at the investment firm during the day, then came home to help Thomas with bookkeeping and administrative tasks at night. For 3 years, we barely saw each other except across that kitchen table. But the sacrifice felt worthwhile. We were building our future. The breakthrough came in 1983 when Thomas developed a more efficient signal booster that caught the attention of larger telecommunications players. Suddenly, Sullivan Communications was being taken seriously. We moved the company to a small office space downtown and hired our first 3 employees. Thomas was in his element, innovating and leading, while I remained behind the scenes, supporting both him and the growing business. That same year, I discovered I was pregnant with our first child, Michael. It wasn't planned. We'd always put the business first, but we were elated. When complications arose in my 7th month, the doctor ordered bed rest. I had to leave my position at the investment firm, which was finally starting to offer me opportunities beyond administrative work. "It's temporary," Thomas assured me. "Once the baby comes and things settle, you can go back or even work more formally for Sullivan Communications." Michael was born healthy in early 1984, followed by our daughter Samantha in 1986. By then, Sullivan Communications had grown to 20 employees and was establishing itself as an innovative force in the industry. Thomas was working 14-hour days, coming home just long enough to kiss the children goodnight. "It's all for us," he would remind me whenever I expressed concern about his absence. "I'm building this for our family." I believed him. I always believed him. When Samantha started kindergarten in 1991, I approached Thomas about rejoining the workforce, perhaps in a financial role at Sullivan Communications, which now occupied 3 floors of a downtown office building. "Why would you need to?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "We're doing well financially, and the children need stability at home. Besides, the company has a full financial team now." His dismissal stung, but I understood his perspective. It was a different era, and Thomas had been raised to believe a man provided while a woman nurtured the home. Still, as the children grew more independent, I found myself with time and intellectual energy to spare. Rather than confronting Thomas again, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I took $10,000 from my personal savings, money I'd been quietly setting aside from household funds over the years, and opened an investment account under my maiden name, Eleanor Mitchell. The financial world had changed dramatically since my brief time in it. I spent hours at the library researching investment strategies, market trends, and emerging technologies. I subscribed to financial journals and attended free investment seminars. At night, after Thomas fell asleep, I would analyze market reports and make careful decisions about where to place my modest funds. My first major success came in 1995 when I invested early in an emerging internet company. When I sold those shares 18 months later, my initial investment had tripled. I diversified into telecommunications stocks, an industry I understood intimately from all those years listening to Thomas, and then into healthcare and technology. Year after year, my portfolio grew. Thomas never noticed. He was too consumed with Sullivan Communications, which was now a regional powerhouse with over 200 employees. We'd moved to a beautiful house in the suburbs, joined the right country club, and to all appearances, were living the American dream. Thomas was respected in business circles, and I was the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties, attending charity galas on his arm, and managing our social calendar to advance his business interests. Our children grew into remarkable young adults. Michael graduated from Princeton with a business degree and, to his father's delight, joined Sullivan Communications in 2006. Samantha pursued medicine at Johns Hopkins, establishing her independence from her father's shadow. I was proud of them, both. Michael for his willingness to engage with his father's world on his own terms, and Samantha for charting her own course entirely. By 2010, my secret investment portfolio had grown to over $5 million. I established a small family office to manage my investments, explaining to Thomas that I was volunteering with a women's financial literacy program, which wasn't entirely untrue. I did volunteer, teaching other women the investment principles. That had served me so well. "That's wonderful, dear," Thomas would say, barely looking up from his work when I mentioned my volunteer activities. "You've always been so good with household budgeting." His condescension no longer bothered me. I knew what I was building, even if he didn't. In 2015, Sullivan Communications went public. The IPO was a resounding success, making Thomas not just wealthy on paper, but genuinely rich. He was now a recognized name in the telecommunications industry, often featured in business publications and speaking at industry conferences. At 62, he was at the pinnacle of his career, with no signs of slowing down. That same year, Megan Wilson joined the company as Thomas's executive assistant. At 32, she was brilliant, ambitious, and beautiful. I met her at the company holiday party and thought nothing of the animated way she and Thomas discussed business strategy. If anything, I was pleased he had such a competent right hand. The following years were quiet and comfortable. We celebrated our 45th wedding anniversary in 2020 with an intimate gathering of family and friends. Thomas gave a touching speech about our journey together, crediting me with making his success possible through my unwavering support. I smiled and accepted the accolades, wondering what he would think if he knew that my investment portfolio now exceeded $20 million. In 2022, Michael came to me with concerns about his father's behavior at work. He'd noticed Thomas and Megan in deep conversation after hours, sharing drinks in Thomas's office with the blinds drawn, leaving industry events together in the same car. "I might be imagining things, Mom," he said carefully, "but I thought you should know." I thanked him for his honesty but dismissed his concerns. Thomas and I had been married for 47 years. We'd built a life together. He wouldn't throw that away, especially not as we approached our golden years. I was wrong. The signs were there if I'd been willing to see them. Thomas started working later, attending more essential business dinners and taking weekend trips for industry conferences that hadn't previously required his presence. When he was home, he was distant, constantly checking his phone and smiling at messages. In early 2024, I noticed a charge on our joint credit card for a woman's bracelet from Tiffany's. When I asked Thomas about it, he claimed it was a retirement gift for his longtime executive assistant, Janet. I didn't remind him that Janet had retired 3 years earlier, and his current assistant was Megan. I simply noted the lie and began to pay more attention. The final confirmation came in April 2025. Thomas had carelessly left his laptop open on his desk at home. A message notification appeared from Megan. "Can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. 2 more weeks until the condo closing. Love you." I didn't confront him. Instead, I contacted my financial team and my attorney. If Thomas was planning a new life, so was I. For weeks, I gathered information. Sullivan Communications had been struggling. Recently, facing increased competition and the need for significant capital investment to update their infrastructure. The stock price had fallen nearly 30% over the past year, and major shareholders were growing restless. Thomas had been pouring his personal funds into the company to maintain control and demonstrate confidence to investors. What he didn't know was that, through various investment vehicles and shell companies, I had been quietly acquiring Sullivan Communications stock as it fell. My team calculated that with a concentrated effort, I could potentially secure a controlling interest if we moved aggressively during this vulnerable period. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. On May 1st, 2025, our 50th wedding anniversary, Thomas didn't come home with flowers or dinner reservations. Instead, he arrived late, sat down at our kitchen table, and ended our marriage over coffee and crossword puzzles. "Eleanor, I don't know how to say this kindly," he began, his voice steady as if delivering a quarterly report to shareholders. "I've realized I need something different in this stage of my life. Megan and I have formed a connection that I can't ignore. I'm moving out this weekend." I listened silently as he outlined his generous financial provisions for me. Our house, a hefty monthly allowance, my share of our investment accounts. He'd clearly consulted lawyers and prepared for every contingency except one, that I might not be the financially dependent wife he'd always assumed I was. When he finished speaking, I simply asked, "Is that everything, Thomas?" He looked relieved at my calm reaction. "Yes, I think that covers everything. I truly am sorry, Eleanor. I never meant for this to happen." I nodded, stood up, and carried my coffee cup to the sink. 50 years deserve more than "I'm sorry," but I accept that this is your decision. I'll have my lawyer contact yours on Monday. The weekend passed in a blur as Thomas packed his things. Michael called, furious with his father but concerned about me. Samantha flew in from Baltimore, ready to help me fight. I assured them both that I was far stronger than their father realized. I've had a long time to prepare for this possibility. I told my children, though they couldn't possibly understand what I meant. Trust that I know exactly what I'm doing. On Monday morning, while Thomas was presumably settling into his new life with Megan, I initiated the final phase of my plan. My investment team launched an aggressive stock acquisition strategy targeting Sullivan Communications shares. By Wednesday, business publications were reporting unusual trading activity in the company's stock, speculating about a possible takeover attempt. Thomas called me on Thursday morning, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Eleanor, do you know anything about what's happening with the company stock?" "Good morning to you too, Thomas," I replied calmly. "I'm doing well. Thank you for asking." "This isn't the time for games," he snapped. "Someone's buying up Sullivan Communications shares at an alarming rate. The board is in crisis mode." I took a deliberate sip of my morning tea before answering. "That sounds quite stressful. Have you identified the buyer?" "No," he admitted. "They're operating through multiple investment vehicles. My CFO thinks it might be Westridge Telecom looking to force a hostile takeover. I've got to go. Emergency." "Board meeting. He paused and his voice softened slightly. "I thought you should know. Despite everything, this company has been part of your life too." "How considerate of you to keep me informed," I said. "Good luck with your meeting." After hanging up, I called my financial team. The acquisition was proceeding exactly as planned. We had secured nearly 28% of outstanding shares and were closing in on the 33% that would give us significant leverage. My lead strategist, Barbara Winslow, a brilliant woman I'd hired away from Goldman Sachs 3 years prior, was coordinating the final push. "Mrs. Sullivan," Barbara said, "we're ready to move on phase 2. Are you certain you want to proceed? Once we reveal ourselves as the buyer, there's no going back." "I've spent 50 years in the shadow of that company," I replied. "It's time to step into the light. Proceed as planned." That afternoon, my lawyer filed the necessary SEC disclosures revealing Mitchell Holdings, my investment company named after my maiden name, as the entity behind the stock acquisitions. Within hours, financial news websites were buzzing with the revelation. I turned on CNBC to watch the story unfold. The business commentators were struggling to piece together who exactly was behind Mitchell Holdings. "The company appears to be controlled by Eleanor Mitchell," one analyst said, looking confused. "But we have very little information about this investor or her background. What we do know is that Mitchell Holdings now owns nearly 30% of Sullivan Communications stock, making her the largest single shareholder above founder and CEO Thomas Sullivan himself, who holds approximately 27%. My phone rang again. "Thomas?" "Of course." "Eleanor Mitchell?" he said without preamble, his voice a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Your maiden name. Is this you? Are you behind this?" "Hello again, Thomas. Yes. Mitchell Holdings is my investment company. I've been operating it for quite some time." There was a long silence before he spoke again. "But how? Where would you get that kind of capital? This makes no sense." "I've been investing since 1991, I explained, feeling a small thrill at finally revealing my secret life. "I started small, made some smart decisions, and built something substantial. While you were building Sullivan Communications, I was creating my own financial empire. You just never bothered to notice or ask." "This is absurd," he spluttered. "You can't possibly understand what you're doing. Whatever game you're playing, it needs to stop now. You could destroy everything I've built." "I understand exactly what I'm doing, Thomas. And I'm not playing games. I'm protecting my investment in the future." "What do you want?" he demanded. Is this revenge? Name your price. I want a meeting, I said simply. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at the Sullivan Communications boardroom. Bring the board members, your executive team, and of course, your lovely assistant Megan. I think it's time we all had a frank discussion about the company's direction. I hung up before he could respond, then called Michael. My son had been kept in the dark about my financial activities all these years, just like his father. "Mom," he said when he answered, his voice strained. "Have you seen the news? There's some investor trying to take over Dad's company. The office is in complete chaos." "I know, dear," I replied. "That investor is me." The silence that followed was profound. "You? But how? When? I don't understand." "It's a long story," I said. "One I should have shared with you years ago. But right, now I need your support. There's a board meeting tomorrow morning. I want you there as my ally." Another pause. "Dad's going to be furious." "Your father made his choice last weekend. Now I'm making mine." Michael was quiet for a moment longer. "I'll be there, Mom. I'm still processing all this, but I'll be there." I spent the evening preparing for the meeting with Barbara and my legal team. We reviewed financial statements, company projections, and market analyses. Sullivan Communications wasn't just vulnerable because of the falling stock price. It was facing a technological crossroads. The company needed to make significant investments in next-generation infrastructure or risk becoming obsolete within 5 years. Thomas had been resistant to this reality, preferring to milk the existing technology rather than risk capital on unproven innovations. His conservative approach had served the company well in the past, but the telecommunications landscape was shifting rapidly. My team had identified this vulnerability months ago, and it had shaped our acquisition strategy. Arrived at Sullivan Communications headquarters at 8:45 a.m. the next morning. The receptionist, who had welcomed me countless times as Mrs. Sullivan when I visited for company events, looked startled to see me. "Mrs. Sullivan, we weren't expecting you." "I have a meeting with the board at 9 a.m., I informed her. "I believe I'm expected." "Oh, of course. Let me just—" She fumbled with the phone, clearly flustered. "Mr. Sullivan's office? Mrs. Sullivan is here for the—" "Yes, I'll send her right up." The executive floor was buzzing with tension when I stepped off the elevator. I could feel eyes following me as I walked confidently toward the boardroom, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that I'd purchased specifically for this occasion. Barbara walked beside me, carrying a sleek leather portfolio. My legal team followed a few paces behind. Thomas was standing at the head of the boardroom table when we entered. The color drained from his face as he took in my professional appearance and entourage. The board members, 8 men and 2 women I'd socialized with at company functions, for years, looked equally shocked. Megan sat to Thomas's right, her expression a mixture of defiance and discomfort. "Eleanor," Thomas said stiffly, "this is highly irregular." "On the contrary," I replied, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. "As the majority shareholder of Sullivan Communications, my presence is entirely appropriate. Shall we begin?" For the next 2 hours, Barbara and I presented our analysis of the company's position and our vision for its future. We outlined the technological challenges, the capital requirements, and our strategy for maintaining market relevance. The board members listened with increasing interest, occasionally glancing at Thomas, whose face had settled into a mask of cold fury. In summary, I concluded, Sullivan Communications has reached a critical juncture. The company can either invest aggressively in fiber optic infrastructure and 6G research, or it can continue its current path and face diminishing returns within 3 to 5 years. As the majority shareholder, I am advocating for the former approach. One of the board members, Richard Martinez, leaned forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, or should I say Ms. Mitchell, your analysis is impressively thorough. But I'm curious. What role do you envision for Thomas in this new direction? All eyes turned to me. This was the question I'd been waiting for. Thomas has built this company from nothing into an industry leader, I acknowledged. His vision and determination brought Sullivan Communications to where it is today. However, I believe the company would benefit from new leadership at this critical juncture. Thomas slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous. You cannot simply walk in here and stage a coup. This company bears my name. It's my life's work. And it was our family's foundation for 50 years, I replied evenly. Until you decided that foundation wasn't worth preserving. The room fell silent as the personal nature of our conflict became clear to everyone present. I move that we take a brief recess, suggested Janet Winters, one of the female board members who had always been particularly kind to me at company events. As the board members filed out, Thomas remained seated, staring at me with a mixture of rage and bewilderment. Megan stood uncertainty behind him, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding drama. "You're doing this to punish me," Thomas said when we were alone, except for Megan and my team. "No, Thomas," I replied. "I'm doing this because I can, because I've earned the right to protect what I helped build. You may have been the face of Sullivan Communications, but I was always part of its foundation, even when neither of us fully recognized that fact. And what about her?" He gestured to Megan, who flinched slightly. "Is destroying her career part of your revenge too?" I turned to look at the younger woman directly. "Ms. Wilson, I have no intention of affecting your employment status. Your relationship with my husband is a personal matter. Your professional capabilities are a separate consideration entirely." She blinked in surprise. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan." The door opened and Michael entered. His expression was solemn as he nodded to me, then turned to his father. "Dad." Thomas's face softened slightly. "Michael, are you part of this takeover too?" "I just found out about Mom's investment company yesterday," Michael admitted. "But I'm here to support her now, and to tell you both that I think there's a better way forward than this public confrontation." "I'm listening," I said, curious about what my son had in mind. Michael took a deep breath. "Sullivan Communications needs new leadership and capital. Investment. Mom's analysis makes that clear. But it also needs the continuity and industry relationships that Dad provides. I'm proposing a transition period where Dad remains as Chairman Emeritus, while a new CEO implements Mom's strategic vision." It was an elegant solution, one that would allow Thomas to save face while still giving me control over the company's direction. I glanced at Barbara, who gave a slight nod of approval. "That could be workable," I conceded. "Provided the board approves a new CEO of my choosing." Thomas's jaw tightened. "And who would that be?" "One of your financial cronies with no telecommunications experience?" "Actually," Michael said, "I was thinking it might be me." The proposal caught us both by surprise. Michael had been content in his role as VP of Business Development, never showing interest in the top position. Thomas had always assumed he would eventually pass the company to Michael, but not for many years yet. "You?" Thomas asked, sounding genuinely startled. "I know this company inside and out," Michael said firmly. "I've worked in nearly every department over the past 19 years. I have relationships with our major clients and partners. And unlike either of you right now, I can approach this situation without personal animosity clouding my judgment." I studied my son with newfound respect. The decisiveness and strategic thinking he was displaying reminded me of both his father and myself, perhaps the best qualities of each of us. "The board would need to conduct a proper search," I said finally. "But I would support your candidacy, Michael." "This is still my company," Thomas insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually," Barbara interjected, showing him a document. "From her portfolio, Mitchell Holdings now controls 33.7% of Sullivan Communications stock. Combined with Michael's 2% employee shares, Mrs. Sullivan effectively controls the company's future direction. The numbers are quite clear. The board members returned, and Michael presented his proposal. After an hour of discussion and negotiation, a framework was established. Thomas would remain as chairman emeritus for 1 year, focusing on client relationships and industry partnerships. The board would conduct a CEO search, with Michael as the internal candidate. I would join the board as chairwoman, overseeing the strategic shift toward next-generation technology investment. As the meeting concluded, board members filed out with mixed expressions of relief and lingering shock. Thomas remained seated, staring at the table as if trying to comprehend how his life had changed so dramatically in a single week. I approached him, conscious of Megan hovering uncertainty nearby. "For what it's worth," I said quietly, "I never intended this to happen when I started investing. I was just looking for something that was my own, something beyond being Mrs. Thomas Sullivan." He looked up at me, his eyes reflecting a complex mixture of emotions. "All these years, I had no idea." "You never asked," I replied simply. "You never wondered what I did with my time, what I might be capable of beyond supporting your dreams. And now you own my life's work." "No, Thomas. I own the company you built. Your life's work should have been our marriage, our family. But you made your choice, and now I've made mine." As I turned to leave, Michael approached his father. Their conversation would be private. Some father-son relationships could survive even this kind of upheaval. Barbara joined me at the elevator. "Congratulations, Mrs. Sullivan. Phase 2 accomplished remarkably smoothly." "It's Ms. Mitchell now," I corrected her. "And let's proceed with Phase 3 immediately. I want the transition team in place by next week." "Of course," she agreed. "And may I say it's been an honor watching you execute this strategy. In 20 years of corporate finance, I've never seen anything quite like it." I smiled as the elevator doors closed. The most successful strategies are often the ones no one sees coming. Outside the Sullivan Communications building, reporters had gathered, alerted by the financial news coverage of the stock acquisition. I paused briefly to make a statement. Sullivan Communications has been a telecommunications leader for over 40 years. Today marks the beginning of an exciting new chapter as the company pivots to embrace next-generation technology infrastructure. As chairwoman of the board, I look forward to guiding this transition and ensuring Sullivan Communications remains at the forefront of our industry for decades to come. A reporter called out, "Mrs. Sullivan, is it true that you acquired control of your husband's company days after he left you for a younger woman?" I met the reporter's eyes with a steady gaze. The timing of various personal and professional developments is certainly interesting, but I prefer to focus on the future of Sullivan Communications rather than the past. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run. As my car pulled away from the curb, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. In just 1 week, I had transformed from the discarded wife of a successful businessman to the controlling shareholder of a multi-million-dollar telecommunications company. The financial press would dissect every aspect of this story, and Thomas would face the humiliation of having his personal and professional lives scrutinized in tandem. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about finally claiming the recognition and respect I'd earned through decades of quiet, strategic work. It was about showing Thomas, and myself, that I had always been more than just his supportive wife. My phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. "Just saw you on CNBC. Mom, you're my new hero. Can't wait to hear the full story." I smiled and texted back, "Dinner tonight at the house. Bring wine. We have much to celebrate." As my driver navigated through downtown Chicago traffic, I gazed at the city skyline that had been the backdrop of my life for 50 years. For decades, I had lived in Thomas's shadow. Now I would step into the light and write my own story, one business decision at a time. The weekend after the board meeting, I moved out of the suburban house Thomas and I had shared for 30 years. It wasn't an emotional decision, the sprawling, five-bedroom colonial had always been more his choice than mine. I purchased a sleek downtown penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, a space that reflected the woman I was becoming rather than the woman I had been. Samantha flew in from Baltimore to help with the move and to marvel at the revelations about her mother's secret financial life. "I still can't believe you've been running an investment company all these years," she said, as we unpacked boxes in my new kitchen. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I handed her a stack of plates to arrange in the cabinets. "At first, it was just a small personal project. By the time it grew into something substantial, I'd become accustomed to keeping it separate from our family life." "From Dad, you mean?" Samantha said shrewdly. "Yes," I admitted. "From your father. He had very clear ideas about our roles, and I chose not to challenge those directly. So you built a financial empire in secret instead." Samantha shook her head, laughing. "Mom, that's both incredibly badass and a little sad." "Life is rarely one thing or the other," I replied. "But I don't regret the choices I made. They led me here, and here feels right." My new life took shape with surprising ease. The penthouse became my sanctuary, minimal, elegant, and entirely mine. I established a formal office for Mitchell Holdings in a nearby building, where Barbara and our growing team managed my expanding portfolio of investments. Sullivan Communications was now just one asset among many, albeit the most personally significant. True to my word, I took my position as chairwoman seriously, working closely with the board and executive team to implement the strategic shift toward next-generation technologies. Thomas maintained his role as chairman emeritus, though our interactions were limited to formal meetings where we maintained a cool professionalism that belied our 50 years of shared history. Michael thrived in the spotlight of the CEO search process. His presentation to the board was compelling and confident, showcasing not just his deep knowledge of the business, but his vision for its future. When the board voted unanimously to appoint him CEO, I felt a complex pride for his achievement, certainly, but also for my own role in creating this opportunity for him. The transition wasn't without its challenges. Some longtime company executives who had been loyal to Thomas resisted the new direction. Industry analysts questioned whether Sullivan Communications was changing course too dramatically. And of course, there was the persistent media fascination, with the personal drama behind the corporate shakeup. 4 months after taking control of the company, I agreed to my first media interview with the Wall Street Journal. The journalist, a thoughtful woman in her 40s, met me at my Mitchell Holdings office. "Ms. Mitchell," she began, "your emergence as a financial powerhouse after 50 years as the wife of Thomas Sullivan has captivated the business world. Many are calling it the ultimate revenge story. How do you see it?" I considered my answer carefully. I don't view it as revenge. I view it as a reclamation of my identity, my capabilities, and my future. For decades, I channeled my financial acumen into building an investment portfolio, rather than seeking recognition or professional status. When circumstances changed, I simply pivoted to a more visible application of those same skills. But surely the timing, acquiring control of your husband's company days after he left you for a younger woman, was motivated by more than business strategy. The timing was accelerated by personal events, yes, I acknowledged. But Mitchell Holdings had been monitoring Sullivan Communications as a potential acquisition for over a year. The company was undervalued and facing technological challenges that required new leadership. Those facts existed independently of my marriage. The article, when published, portrayed me as a calculating strategist who had played the long game both personally and professionally. It contained just enough hints of the personal drama to satisfy the gossip-hungry, while establishing my business credibility beyond the scorned wife narrative. The headline: The Silent Investor: How Eleanor Mitchell Built a Financial Empire. In the shadows, helped shift the focus from my marriage to my financial achievements. In the months that followed, I settled into a rhythm that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. My days were filled with board meetings, investment decisions, and strategic planning sessions. I joined several prestigious economic forums and accepted invitations to speak at business schools about alternative investment strategies and women in finance. Gradually, the narrative around Sullivan Communications stabilized. Under Michael's leadership and with substantial capital investment in new technologies, the company's stock began to recover. Industry publications praised the bold pivot toward fiber optic infrastructure and 6G research. By the 6-month mark, even the most skeptical analysts were acknowledging the wisdom of the strategic shift. Thomas, meanwhile, was struggling to adapt to his diminished role. While he maintained his title and office, his influence over company decisions had waned significantly. I heard through Michael that he and Megan had purchased a luxury condominium downtown, not far from my new penthouse. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I felt no satisfaction in his apparent discomfort with the new power dynamics. It was Megan who reached out to me first, requesting a private meeting over coffee. Curiosity compelled me to accept. She arrived at the upscale cafe looking polished but nervous, twisting the strap of her designer handbag as she slid into the chair across from me. "Thank you for meeting me, Ms. Mitchell," she said, deliberately using my professional name. "I appreciate your willingness to speak with me outside of work contexts." "I assume this isn't about the Sullivan Communications business," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "No, it's personal." She took a deep breath. "I want you to know that when my relationship with Thomas began, he told me your marriage had been effectively over for years. He said you led separate lives and stayed together only for appearances." I sipped my coffee, allowing the information to settle. It wasn't surprising that Thomas had rewritten our history to justify his choices, but hearing the specific narrative he'd constructed was nonetheless jarring. "That wasn't true," I said finally. "But I imagine you've figured that out by now." She nodded, looking down at her untouched cappuccino. "Thomas he isn't who I thought he was. Or maybe he is. And I just didn't want to see it clearly. Thomas is a man who believes his own stories," I observed. "He's always been skilled at constructing narratives that position him as the hero, or at least justify his actions to himself. He's been different since the company takeover. Angry, resentful. He blames you, of course, but he also—" She hesitated. "He started questioning my loyalty, suggesting I might have known about your investment plans somehow." I laughed despite myself. That would be quite the conspiracy theory. "I know it's absurd, but he needs someone to blame besides himself." She finally looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Ms. Mitchell. I made my choices. But I wanted you to know that I see more clearly now. And I'm sorry for my part in hurting you. It wasn't an apology I had sought or needed, but I appreciated the gesture nonetheless. This young woman had been caught in Thomas's web just as I had been 50 years earlier, though with considerably less innocence on both sides. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "For what it's worth, I think you're extremely capable professionally. Your work at Sullivan Communications has been impressive, politics aside." She seemed surprised by the compliment. "Thank you. I've actually been thinking about exploring other opportunities. It's becoming increasingly difficult to work with Thomas in his current state." "I can imagine." I hesitated, then made a spontaneous decision. "If you're looking for a change, Mitchell Holdings is expanding our telecommunications investment division. We could use someone with your industry knowledge and experience." Megan stared at me in shock. "You're offering me a job? After everything?" "I'm suggesting you submit your resume if you're interested," I clarified. "You'd go through the standard interview process. But yes, I would consider your application seriously. Business is business, Megan. Personal feelings don't need to factor into professional decisions." 2 weeks later, Megan Wilson joined Mitchell Holdings as a telecommunications sector analyst. The move raised eyebrows both at Sullivan Communications and within financial circles, but I stood firmly behind the decision. Her industry insight proved valuable immediately, and her work ethic was undeniable. Thomas, predictably, viewed her departure as yet another betrayal, further fueling his spiral of resentment. As the 1-year mark of our separation approached, my lawyer contacted me about finalizing our divorce. Thomas had been delaying the process, perhaps as his last remaining form of control. I instructed my attorney to proceed with firm deadlines, unwilling to remain legally bound to a man who had walked away from our marriage so casually. The divorce negotiations were complicated by Thomas's diminished financial position. He had invested heavily in Sullivan Communications stock before the downturn, and my acquisition had occurred before he could recoup those losses. While still wealthy by any reasonable standard, he was worth significantly less than he had been a year earlier. He's requesting additional shares in the settlement, my lawyer informed me. He claims that since the company bear his name and was built during your marriage, you should compensate him beyond the standard division of assets. Interesting argument from a man who walked out on 50 years of marriage for his much younger assistant, I replied. Counter with the standard proposal. I have no interest in being punitive, but I won't be manipulated either. The divorce was finalized 3 months later, with Thomas receiving exactly what he was legally entitled to. No more, no less. When I signed the final papers, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. For 50 years, my identity had been inextricably linked with Thomas Sullivan. Now, at 73, I was fully Eleanor Mitchell for the first time since college. To mark the occasion, I invited Michael, Samantha, and their families to my penthouse for dinner. As we gathered around my dining table overlooking the Chicago skyline, I raised my glass in a toast. To new beginnings, I said, and to the family bonds that endure through all of life's changes. After dinner, while the grandchildren played, in the living room, Samantha pulled me aside. Mom, I've been thinking about something, she said, her expression serious. All those years you were building your investment portfolio in secret. Were you planning this eventual outcome? Did you know somehow that you'd need financial independence from Dad? I considered the question thoughtfully. No, not consciously. I started investing because I needed something that was mine alone, a place to apply my intelligence and ambition when other avenues were closed to me. Financial independence was initially just a welcome side effect. But you must have suspected Dad might... She trailed off, not wanting to voice the betrayal directly. Your father always had a certain restlessness, I acknowledged. A constant seeking for the next achievement, the next validation. I didn't specifically anticipate Megan, but I recognized the pattern. Perhaps on some level, I was preparing for an eventual reckoning of some kind. I'm proud of you, Samantha said, squeezing my hand. Not just for the business success, but for how you've handled everything. You've shown remarkable grace. Grace wasn't always my first instinct, I admitted with a small smile. But I discovered that taking control of my life was far more satisfying than seeking retribution. The following Monday, I arrived at my Mitchell Holdings office to find Barbara waiting with surprising news. Westridge Telecom has approached us about a potential merger with Sullivan Communications, she reported. Their initial offer is very generous, a 40% premium over current market value. I raised an eyebrow. Interesting timing. What's driving their interest? The fiber optic infrastructure Sullivan has been developing would complement their existing network perfectly, and frankly, the company's value has increased substantially under the new leadership. This is a testament to the strategic shift you implemented. The irony wasn't lost on me. Thomas had initially feared a takeover by Westridge Telecom, and now that very scenario might provide a substantial return on my investment in Sullivan Communications. More significantly, it would be a vindication of the business decisions I'd made against considerable skepticism. Set up a preliminary meeting, I instructed Barbara. And have Michael join us. If we pursue this, it will impact his position significantly. The merger discussions progressed rapidly over the next month. Westridge was eager to acquire Sullivan's technology and client base, while offering substantial roles for key executives, including Michael. The combined entity would be one of the largest telecommunications companies in the Midwest, with expanded national reach. When the board voted to approve the merger, Thomas was the lone dissenting voice. In his final act as chairman emeritus, he delivered an impassioned speech about legacy and independence that might have been moving had it not been so transparently self-serving. When the vote went against him, he resigned his position immediately, severing his last tie with the company he had founded. The merger was finalized 3 months later in a ceremony at Westridge's headquarters. As the major shareholder of Sullivan Communications, I signed the final papers alongside Westridge's CEO, officially creating Westridge Sullivan Communications. The transaction netted Mitchell Holdings a profit of over $100 million on our original investment, a return that made headlines in the financial press. At the reception following the signing, I found myself approached by Thomas. It was the first time we'd spoken directly in nearly a year. He looked older, the strain of recent events evident in the new lines around his eyes and mouth. "Congratulations, Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying only a hint of the bitterness I knew he felt. "You've managed to completely erase my life's work in less than 2 years." "Not erased, Thomas," I corrected him. "Evolved. Sullivan remains in the company name, and the technologies you developed are still at its core. That's more legacy than many achieve in a lifetime." He studied me with a mixture of resentment and reluctant respect. "You know, for 50 years I thought I knew you completely. How did I miss this side of you?" "You saw what you expected to see," I replied simply. "We both did, in different ways. And are you happy now? With all of this?" He gestured to the opulent reception, the celebrating executives, the visible symbols of corporate success. I considered the question seriously. I'm fulfilled in ways I never expected to be at this stage of life. I'm engaged, challenged, and valued for my capabilities rather than my supporting role. "So yes, Thomas, I am happy. Are you?" He didn't answer, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. Thomas had always defined himself through achievement and control. Without his company and with his personal life in apparent disarray, he was struggling to construct a new narrative for himself. "It didn't have to end this way," he said finally. "No," I agreed, "it didn't. But it did end this way, and now we both have to write new stories for ourselves." As Thomas walked away, I felt an unexpected lightness. For decades, I had orbited him like a satellite, reflecting his light rather than generating my own. Now, at an age when many were settling into quiet retirement, I was standing at the center of my own solar system, with new possibilities radiating in all directions. That evening, alone in my penthouse, I stood by the window watching the lights of Chicago shimmer across Lake Michigan. I thought about the young woman I had been 50 years earlier, with her business degree and dampened ambitions, accepting the supportive role that seemed the only option available. I wished I could tell her that her dreams wouldn't always be deferred, that her intelligence and determination would eventually find their full expression. But perhaps it had all unfolded exactly as it needed to. Every investment, every quiet calculation, every year of patient observation had prepared me for this moment of transformation. At 73, I wasn't reaching the end of my story. I was finally writing the most interesting chapters. 2 years after the merger that created Westridge Sullivan Communications, my life had settled into a new rhythm that still occasionally surprised me. At 75, when many of my contemporaries were deeply entrenched in retirement, I found myself busier and more engaged than ever. Mitchell Holdings had expanded significantly, with dedicated divisions focusing on telecommunications, renewable energy, and healthcare technology. 3 sectors I believed would shape the coming decades. My professional reputation had transcended the initial flurry of interest in my personal story. Business publications now sought my insights on market trends and investment strategies, rather than details about my marriage and divorce. I had been appointed to several prestigious corporate boards and had established a scholarship fund for women pursuing careers in finance and business leadership. One crisp autumn morning, I was reviewing quarterly reports in my downtown office when Barbara interrupted with unexpected news. Ms. Mitchell, Thomas Sullivan has announced his retirement. From Westridge Sullivan. There's going to be a formal reception next month. I set down my tablet, surprised by this development. After the merger, Thomas had accepted a position as a senior advisor with Westridge Sullivan, a largely ceremonial role that nonetheless allowed him to maintain some connection to the industry he had helped shape. I had assumed he would hold onto that position indefinitely, unwilling to relinquish his last tenuous connection to his former life. Has he given any reason for the timing? I asked. Barbara shook her head. Nothing specific in the press release, just the usual platitudes about pursuing new opportunities and spending time with family. Family was an interesting choice of words. Thomas's relationship with our children had been strained since our divorce. Michael maintained a cordial professional relationship with his father, but personal interactions were limited. Samantha had been less forgiving, keeping her distance until Thomas made a genuine effort to repair the damage his choices had caused. I hadn't kept close tabs on Thomas's personal life, but through the inevitable corporate grapevine, I knew that his relationship with Megan had ended about a year after she joined Mitchell Holdings. She had flourished in her role with us, recently being promoted to head our telecommunications investment division, a position that put her in occasional contact with Michael in his role as a board member for Westridge Sullivan following the merger. "Will you attend the reception?" Barbara asked, interrupting my thoughts. It was a reasonable question. As a major shareholder in Westridge Sullivan and a significant figure in the telecommunications investment community, my presence would be expected. Yet it would also mark the first social event where Thomas and I would both be present since our divorce. Yes, I decided. Send my RSVP. It's important to maintain professional connections, regardless of personal history. The retirement reception was held in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Peninsula Hotel, an appropriately elegant venue for marking the end of a noteworthy career. I arrived deliberately late, allowing the event to be well underway before making my entrance. Despite my efforts to minimize attention, conversations paused momentarily as I crossed the threshold, curious eyes tracking my progress through the room. Michael materialized at my side almost immediately, offering a protective arm. At 42, my son had grown into his executive role with confidence, now overseeing major strategic initiatives for Westridge Sullivan, while maintaining a seat on Mitchell Holdings' advisory board. "Quite the turnout," he observed, guiding me toward the bar. "Every telecommunications executive in the Midwest must be here." "Your father always knew how to build a network," I replied. "In business, if not in personal matters." Michael grimaced slightly. "He's actually been different lately, more reflective. He called Samantha last month, had a long conversation that ended with him apologizing for his choices. She was cautiously optimistic about it. This was surprising news. Thomas had never been one for introspection or acknowledgement of mistakes. Before I could respond, the man himself approached, looking elegant if somewhat diminished in an impeccably tailored suit. "Eleanor." He greeted me, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming." "Congratulations on your retirement, Thomas," I replied with equal formality. 52 years is an impressive tenure in any industry. An awkward silence descended, filled with the weight of our shared history and divergent paths. Michael glanced between us before tactfully excusing himself to greet a colleague across the room. "I've been following Mitchell Holdings' expansion into renewable energy," Thomas said finally. The solar storage technology you've backed looks promising. It is, I confirmed. The integration with existing power grids has exceeded expectations. We're anticipating widespread adoption within 5 years. We fell into a surprisingly comfortable discussion of industry developments and investment trends. For a brief moment, it felt like our old Saturday morning conversations over coffee and crossword puzzles before everything changed. Would you join me for a moment? Thomas asked suddenly. There's something I'd like to discuss privately. Curious, I followed him to a small antique room off the main ballroom, where the noise of the reception was muted to a distant hum. Thomas closed the door behind us and turned to face me, his expression more vulnerable than I had seen in years. I've been doing a lot of thinking as this retirement approached, he began. About my career, certainly, but more about the choices I've made and their consequences. I owe you an apology, Eleanor, a profound one. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I threw away 50 years of partnership for a fantasy of youth and newness, he said quietly. I convinced myself that I deserved more, that I was entitled to start fresh without considering what that meant for you or for our family. It was selfish and short-sighted, and I've paid for it every day since. Why tell me this now, Thomas? I asked. It's been 3 years. Because I'm finally clearing the ledger before truly starting the next chapter, he replied. I've sold my remaining shares in Westridge Sullivan. I'm leaving Chicago next month. This was unexpected news. Where will you go? Boston, initially. Samantha has invited me to spend some time getting to know her family better. A generous offer I don't truly deserve. After that, I'm not certain. I've purchased a small sailing vessel. Perhaps I'll explore the eastern seaboard for a while. The image of Thomas, always so driven by expansion and achievement, living a nomadic life on a sailboat was difficult to reconcile with the man I had known for over 5 decades. That sounds like a significant departure from your previous priorities, I observed. He smiled faintly. One of many realizations these past few years has brought. The endless pursuit of more success, more recognition, more wealth, leads nowhere meaningful in the end. You understood that long before I did. I wouldn't say that, I countered. I've hardly been living as a contemplative monk these past 3 years. No, but your success has had purpose beyond itself. The Scholarship Foundation, the mentorship program for women in finance. You've created meaning alongside achievement. That's a distinction I missed for most of my life. His candor was disarming. This reflective, humble Thomas was a stranger. To me, yet oddly familiar. Glimpses of the young man I had fallen in love with so many years ago, before ambition hardened his edges. I wish you well, Thomas, I said finally. Truly. Thank you. He hesitated, then added, There's one more thing. I've established a charitable foundation focused on educational opportunities for first-generation college students. I'd like to name it the Eleanor Mitchell Foundation, if you'd permit it. I stared at him in genuine surprise. That's unexpected. It seems fitting, he replied. You were the first in your family to attend college, and your success after our divorce has been a powerful example of reinvention. At an age when most people have settled into fixed patterns, the foundation will support those seeking similar transformations through education. I was touched by the gesture, despite our complicated history. I would be honored. Thank you. As we returned to the reception, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere between us. Not reconciliation exactly, but a release of the tension that had defined our interactions since the divorce. Some fundamental acknowledgement had occurred that allowed us both to move forward, unburdened by lingering resentment. The following week brought another unexpected development. Megan Wilson requested a meeting at my office, arriving with uncharacteristic nervousness. Ms. Mitchell, she began after declining coffee, I wanted to inform you personally before announcing it more broadly. I've accepted a position as Chief Investment Officer with Meridian Partners in New York. That's a significant opportunity, I acknowledged, genuinely pleased for her advancement, though disappointed to lose her expertise. "They're fortunate to have you." "Thank you." She paused, fidgeting slightly. "I also wanted to thank you for taking a chance on me 3 years ago when many would have written me off as, well, as the other woman who had no value beyond that unfortunate label. You saw my professional capabilities separate from my personal choices, and that opportunity changed the trajectory of my career." "You earned your position and subsequent promotions through your work," I replied simply. "Your personal life was never relevant to your professional capabilities." She smiled, wryly. "That distinction is rare, especially among women of your generation who might have had every reason to view me as the enemy. Your ability to compartmentalize was a valuable lesson, one I'll carry with me to New York." After Megan left, I found myself reflecting on how thoroughly all our lives had been transformed in just 3 years. Thomas retiring to a sailboat and reconnecting with his daughter. Megan advancing to executive leadership at a prestigious firm. Michael balancing his corporate role with a growing interest in the educational foundation his father had established. And myself, still discovering new challenges and opportunities at an age when society often expects women to quietly disappear. That evening, I received a call from Samantha. "Mom, I just heard Dad's moving to Boston next month," she began without preamble. "He says you two spoke at his retirement party?" "Briefly," I confirmed. "He seems changed." "He is," she agreed. "The heart attack last year shook him pretty deeply." I sat up straighter. "Heart attack? What heart attack?" There was a pause on the line. "You didn't know? Dad had a mild heart attack about 10 months ago. He didn't tell you?" "No," I said, processing this new information. "He never mentioned it. It wasn't severe, caught early, minimal damage, but it gave him quite the wake-up call. That's when he started reaching out to me, trying to repair our relationship. He's been working with a therapist since then, addressing some of his issues." This revelation cast Thomas's retirement and reflective mood in a new light. A brush with mortality had apparently prompted a reevaluation of priorities that decades of professional success and personal upheaval had not. "I'm glad he's getting the help he needs," I said carefully. "And I'm pleased you're rebuilding your relationship. It's still a work in progress," Samantha admitted. "But it feels worthwhile now, which it didn't before. He's different, more present, more willing to listen." She paused. "Mom, I know this is awkward to ask, but would you consider having dinner with us when he first arrives in Boston? Just a simple family meal. Michael could fly in too." The request gave me pause. 3 years ago, I would have refused outright. But now, with the sharpest edges of pain dulled by time and success, I found myself willing to consider it. "I'll think about it," I promised. "No guarantees, but I'll consider it." The opportunity to test this newfound detente came sooner than expected. 2 weeks later, Michael called with surprising news. "Mom, Dad's been nominated for the Telecommunications Innovation Lifetime Achievement Award," he announced. "The ceremony is next month in New York. Given your current position in the industry and your history with Sullivan Communications, the committee is hoping you might present the award." I nearly dropped the phone. "They want me to present Thomas with a Lifetime Achievement Award? That's either spectacularly tone-deaf or deliberately provocative." "Actually, it was Dad's idea," Michael replied. "He said no one else has better standing to evaluate his contributions to the industry, both their strengths and their limitations." The request was so unexpected that I found myself agreeing before fully thinking through the implications. In the weeks that followed, I wavered between regretting my decision and seeing it as an opportunity to publicly close this chapter with grace. The award ceremony was held at the Grand Hyatt in Manhattan, with hundreds of telecommunications executives and innovators in attendance. I spent the day of the event carefully preparing my remarks, striving for a tone that acknowledged Thomas's genuine contributions without either glossing over our complicated history or dwelling on it inappropriately. When I took the stage that evening, the room fell silent with anticipation. The tension was palpable. Everyone present was aware of our backstory and eager to see how this unusual moment would unfold. "Good evening," I began, scanning the attentive faces. "It is my unexpected honor to present this year's Lifetime Achievement Award." The telecommunications industry has transformed society over the past 5 decades, connecting people across continents and bringing information to our fingertips in ways previously unimaginable. Many individuals have contributed to this revolution, but few have shown the consistent vision and determination of Thomas Sullivan. I paused, gathering my thoughts before continuing. I first met Thomas in 1974, when telecommunications meant rotary phones and operators connecting long-distance calls. Over countless conversations at our kitchen table, I watched him envision a future where information could travel instantaneously across vast distances. Sullivan Communications began in our spare bedroom with little more than ambitious plans and unwavering confidence. Through innovation, strategic risk-taking, and remarkable persistence, Thomas built a company that helped shape the modern communications landscape. I allowed my gaze to meet Thomas's in the front row. Our journeys have taken unexpected turns, both professionally and personally. But tonight we gather to recognize a half-century of contributions that have genuinely improved how people connect across distances. The technologies Thomas pioneered have facilitated countless family reunions, business collaborations, and moments of connection that would otherwise have been lost to distance and time. It is therefore my honor to present the Telecommunications Innovation Lifetime Achievement Award to Thomas Sullivan, whose vision helped create the connected world we now take for granted. Thomas approached the stage amid enthusiastic applause. As he accepted the award from my hands, our eyes met briefly, acknowledging without words the complex journey that had brought us to this moment of mutual respect after so much turbulence. His acceptance speech was gracious and surprisingly humble, focusing on the collaborative nature of innovation and the many people who had contributed to his success over the years. In his conclusion, he turned to address me directly. "I want to especially thank Eleanor Mitchell, without whom Sullivan Communications would never have existed. Her early support, financial acumen, and unwavering belief made everything possible, and her later leadership demonstrated just how much talent had been standing in the shadows all along. This award recognizes a lifetime of work that we built together, even if neither of us fully realized it at the time." The audience rose in a standing ovation, not just for Thomas's achievements, but for the unexpected reconciliation playing out before them. As we exited the stage together, he leaned closer. "Thank you, Eleanor. Not just for tonight, but for everything. The good years and the lessons from the difficult ones." "You're welcome, Thomas," I replied, finding I genuinely meant it. At the reception that followed, industry colleagues approached us separately and sometimes together, navigating the unusual dynamic with varying degrees of tact. By unspoken agreement, Thomas and I maintained a cordial distance, though without the tension that had characterized our previous encounters. Late in the evening, I found myself on the terrace overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline. Thomas joined me, offering a glass of champagne. "To new chapters," he proposed, raising his glass. I met his toast with my own. "To learning at any age." As we stood in companionable silence watching the city lights, I reflected on the improbable journey that had brought us to this moment of peace. From college sweethearts to business partners to adversaries and now to something like respectful acquaintances, our story had taken turns neither of us could have anticipated. "You know," Thomas said reflectively, "for years I thought losing Sullivan Communications was the greatest failure of my life. I was wrong. Failing to see you, truly see you, for 50 years was my greatest mistake." "We all have blind spots," I replied. "I spent decades hiding parts of myself rather than demanding recognition. That wasn't entirely your responsibility. Perhaps not, but I'm glad you finally claimed your due. The next morning, as I prepared to return to Chicago, I received a package at my hotel. Inside was a small wooden box containing an original Sullivan Communications stock certificate from 1980, the first shares ever issued, along with a handwritten note, "Eleanor, this belongs with you now," the tangible beginning of a journey that neither of us could have foreseen the end of. Whatever happens next, know that I am genuinely grateful for the lessons, however difficult they were to learn. With respect and appreciation, Thomas, I traced my fingers over the ornate certificate, remembering the young couple at the kitchen table dreaming of building something significant together. We had succeeded beyond anything we could have imagined, though the final picture looked nothing like our original vision. As my car drove toward the airport, I made a spontaneous decision. "Change of plans," I told the driver. "Take me to Boston." Instead, it was time to accept Samantha's dinner invitation, not to reclaim the past or rewrite our history, but to acknowledge that even the most painful endings could lead to unexpected new beginnings. At 75, I was still discovering that life had unlimited capacity to surprise, and that I had unlimited capacity to adapt to those surprises with grace, strength, and an open heart. Boston welcomed me with unusually mild weather for early spring. Samantha met me at Logan Airport, her surprise at my spontaneous arrival quickly giving way to delight. "Dad's not expecting you until next week," she explained as we drove toward her Brookline home. "This will certainly make dinner interesting." "I hope it's not an imposition," I said, suddenly uncertain about my impulsive decision. "Are you kidding? The kids will be thrilled to see their grandmother." She glanced at me with a smile. "And honestly, I think it's good for all of us to move beyond the rigid expectations of how divorced families are supposed to interact." Samantha had established herself as one of Boston's leading cardiothoracic surgeons, balancing her demanding career with raising twins who had recently turned 12. Her husband, Daniel, was a professor of architectural history at MIT, their partnership a model of mutual support and shared responsibilities that Thomas and I had never quite achieved. Their home reflected their balanced approach to life, a thoughtfully renovated Victorian with plenty of space for family gatherings, but nothing ostentatious or status-driven. As we pulled into the driveway, I spotted Thomas sitting on the front porch with one of the twins, apparently deep in conversation. He looked up as our car doors slammed, his expression shifting from surprise to something more complex when he recognized me. "Eleanor," he said, standing as I approached. "I wasn't expecting you until next week." "Change of plans," I replied. "I hope that's all right." Before he could respond, I was engulfed in enthusiastic hugs from both grandchildren, their rapid-fire questions about Chicago and my work creating a welcome buffer for the adults to adjust to this unexpected reunion. Dinner that evening was surprisingly comfortable. The children's presence helped ease any potential tension, their natural curiosity about our lives before they were born opening conversations about happier memories rather than recent conflicts. Thomas spoke of our early years in Chicago with genuine warmth, reminiscing about the cramped apartment and ambitious dreams that had launched our shared journey. "Your grandmother was the one who insisted we could afford the first real office space," he told the twins. "I was convinced we needed to wait another year, but she ran the numbers and proved it was feasible immediately. Without that push, Sullivan Communications might have remained a small operation for years longer." I was startled by this generous recounting. In Thomas's previous tellings, he had always been the bold risk-taker, while I was the cautious counterweight. This revised history was closer to the truth, but represented a significant shift in his perspective. After the children went to bed, the four adults lingered over coffee in Samantha's kitchen. Daniel, perceptive and diplomatic, steered the conversation toward neutral professional topics before excusing himself to grade papers, leaving the three of us alone. "So," Samantha said, refilling our cups, Are we going to address the elephant in the room, or should we keep pretending this is a completely normal family gathering? Thomas and I exchanged glances, a flicker of our old silent communication passing between us. I think, I began carefully, we're all realizing that family connections don't fit neatly into the boxes society creates for them, especially after decades of shared history. What your mother means, Thomas added with unexpected humor, is that after you reach our age, holding grudges becomes exhausting. Finding peace is more appealing than being right. Samantha studied us both. I never thought I'd see this day. Not after everything that happened. Life has a way of surprising us, I replied. 3 years ago, I couldn't have imagined sitting at this table with your father without simmering resentment. But success has been a powerful healer, and time provides perspective that isn't available in the heat of crisis. The heart attack helped too, Thomas admitted. Nothing clarifies priorities quite like a brush with mortality. We talked late into the night, navigating through layers of family history with increasing honesty. Thomas spoke about his regrets regarding our marriage and his relationship with our children. Samantha shared how his choices had affected her own views on commitment and trust. I acknowledged the ways I had contributed to our dysfunctional patterns by hiding my capabilities, rather than challenging the status quo directly. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Too much had happened, but it was a genuine beginning of a new, more authentic connection between us. I extended my Boston visit to a full week, establishing a comfortable routine that included mornings with Thomas at a neighborhood cafe, afternoons exploring the city or spending time with the twins, after school and family dinners at Samantha's house. The gradual reintegration of our fractured family unit felt both strange and oddly natural, as if we were finally finding the balance that had eluded us during our marriage. On my final evening in Boston, Thomas and I walked along the Charles Towsedium River as sunset painted the sky in dramatic oranges and purples. I'm taking delivery of the sailboat next month, he mentioned as we paused to watch rowers gliding across the water. Nothing extravagant, just large enough for coastal exploration. I was thinking of starting with the Maine coastline this summer. That sounds peaceful, I replied. A well-deserved rest after decades of corporate intensity. He hesitated before continuing. I've been thinking, would you consider joining me for a day sail once I've gotten comfortable with handling the boat? Perhaps when you're next in Boston visiting Samantha? The invitation surprised me. I haven't been sailing since our trip to Martha's Vineyard in the 80s. I remember. You had a natural feel for it. He smiled at the memory. Just a day trip. As friends reconnecting after a difficult passage, I considered his offer. I'd like that, Thomas. Thank you. As I flew back to Chicago the next day, I reflected on how thoroughly my expectations had been upended. 3 years ago, when Thomas walked out of our marriage, I had channeled my hurt and anger into professional ambition, seeking vindication through success. That path had indeed led to remarkable achievements, but it had also brought me to an unexpected place of personal reconciliation I hadn't thought possible. The following months brought new developments on multiple fronts. Michael announced his engagement to Caroline Matthews, a brilliant environmental engineer he had met through Westridge Sullivan's green energy initiatives. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation officially launched with an inaugural class of 50 scholarship recipients, first-generation college students from across the country pursuing degrees in business, technology, and healthcare. Most surprisingly, Megan Wilson contacted me from her new position in New York with an investment opportunity that caught my attention. There's a healthcare AI startup developing algorithms for early disease detection that aligns perfectly with Mitchell Holdings' portfolio, she explained during our video call. The founder is a woman who left medical practice to address systemic inefficiencies through technology. I thought you might be interested in meeting her. Send me the details, I replied, impressed by Megan's professional evolution from Thomas's assistant to a confident executive making strategic connections across industries. The meeting with Dr. Andrea Flores, the AI startup founder, proved fascinating. At 42, she had the technical expertise of a seasoned physician combined with the entrepreneurial vision of a natural innovator. Her technology promised to democratize early detection capabilities, bringing sophisticated diagnostic algorithms to underserved communities through affordable mobile platforms. The traditional venture capital route hasn't been particularly welcoming, Andrea explained frankly. They love the technology but keep suggesting I bring on a male CEO with more business experience to make the company investable. I nodded, familiar with the dynamic she described. And your response to that suggestion? She smiled, determination evident in her expression. I've built this from the ground up while practicing medicine full-time. I'm not handing control to someone else just because they fit a more conventional leadership profile. Good, I replied. I wouldn't be interested if you were willing to step aside that easily. By the end of our meeting, I had decided to make a significant personal investment in Andrea's company, Health Vision AI, separate from Mitchell Holdings' potential involvement. The parallels between her situation and my own early experiences were striking. A capable woman seeking to apply her expertise in systems resistant to acknowledging female leadership. When I mentioned the investment to Thomas during one of our now regular phone conversations, he surprised me with his insight. You're creating the opportunities you wished had existed for you, he observed, building the support systems you had to forge for yourself. I suppose I am, I acknowledged, though I hadn't quite framed it that way. It's a powerful form of legacy building, he continued, more meaningful than having your name on a building or company letterhead. This observation sparked a series of discussions about legacy that continued over several months. What truly remained after a lifetime of work? What impact persisted beyond financial success or professional recognition? These conversations eventually led to a collaborative project neither of us could have anticipated. In the fall, Thomas called with an unexpected proposal. I've been approached about writing a book on telecommunications innovation over the past 5 decades. The publisher is interested in my insider perspective on how the industry evolved. That sounds perfect for you, I replied. You've always been an engaging storyteller. I'm considering it, he said, but I've proposed a different angle. I suggested a dual narrative, my technical and business perspective paired with your investment insights and observations on the industry's financial evolution. 2 viewpoints on the same transformative era. The idea was intriguing. A professional collaboration that would leverage our complementary expertise while acknowledging our separate journeys. After some consideration, I agreed to participate, with the understanding that we would work with an experienced ghostwriter to shape our recollections into a cohesive narrative. The book project provided an unexpected framework for processing our shared history. Working sessions often led to revelations about how differently we had experienced the same events, our perspectives shaped by our respective positions and expectations. Thomas was genuinely shocked to learn how I had perceived certain pivotal moments in our professional lives, decisions he had presented as collaborative that I had experienced as unilateral, achievements he had claimed credit for that had significantly involved my input. I genuinely didn't realize, he admitted during one particularly intense discussion about the early days of Sullivan Communications. I believed my own narrative so completely that I couldn't see the alternative perspective. Most of us do, I replied. It's human nature to cast ourselves as the heroes of our own stories. The book, titled Connected, Dual Perspectives on the Telecommunications Revolution, was published the following spring to considerable industry interest. Our unusual personal history added a compelling human dimension to what might otherwise have been a dry business memoir, and the contrasting viewpoints provided valuable insights for a new generation of industry leaders and investors. The publication led to a series of joint speaking engagements at business schools and industry conferences. Standing alongside Thomas on stages across the country, presenting our different experiences of the same transformative era, I often marveled at life's unexpected turns. 3 years earlier, I had purchased his company in what many viewed as the ultimate act of revenge. Now we were professional collaborators, respected colleagues, and something approaching friends. At 76, I found myself in a position I could never have anticipated, professionally fulfilled, personally at peace, and engaged in building a legacy beyond financial success. Mitchell Holdings continued to thrive, with a growing emphasis on investments that combined profitable returns with meaningful social impact. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation expanded its scholarship program to include mentorship opportunities and internship placements for its recipients. Most surprisingly, I discovered a newfound freedom in my relationship with Thomas. Freed from the constraints of marriage and the bitterness of betrayal, we had found our way to a more authentic connection based on mutual respect and shared history without the weight of unfulfilled expectations. The day sale Thomas had proposed became a reality that summer, a perfect New England afternoon exploring Boston Harbor on his modestly elegant sailboat, aptly named Second Wind. As we navigated the sunlit waters, our conversation flowed easily between practical sailing matters, updates on our children and grandchildren, and reflections on our unconventional journey. If someone had described this scenario to me 3 years ago, I remarked as we anchored in a sheltered cove for lunch, I would have thought they were delusional. Thomas laughed, the sound more relaxed than I remembered from our later years together. Life has a remarkable capacity to surprise us, especially when we release our grip on how we think things should be. That's rather philosophical coming from a telecommunications engineer, I teased. Near-death experiences tend to spark philosophical tendencies, he replied with a wry smile, along with sailing impulses and an appreciation for present moments rather than 5-year strategic plans. As we sat in companionable silence, watching seabirds wheel above the harbor, I reflected on the strange circuitous route that had brought us to this peaceful moment. The anger that had fueled my acquisition of Sullivan Communications had long since dissipated, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of our shared journey and separate paths. That evening, as we docked at the marina and prepared to part ways, Thomas, to his modest waterfront apartment, me to Samantha's house, he paused before helping me onto the pier. Eleanor, he said thoughtfully, I've been wanting to ask you something. All this legacy building we've been doing, the foundation, the book, your investments in the next generation of leaders, has made me curious. If you could share one lesson from your journey, what would it be? I considered the question carefully, thinking about the young women I mentored and the scholarship recipients embarking on their own professional paths. Trust your capabilities, even when others don't recognize them, I said finally. And remember that it's never too late to claim your own power. I spent decades in the shadows before stepping into the light. That was partly circumstantial, partly my own choice to avoid conflict. But when the moment came to reinvent myself, I discovered strengths I had been cultivating all along without fully acknowledging them. Thomas nodded slowly. That's a powerful message. The book we've written tells that story, but perhaps not explicitly enough. Perhaps there's another book in that, I suggested, one more focused on late-in-life reinvention and resilience. I'd read that book, he replied with genuine interest, though I suspect you should write that one solo. My perspective would be that of the cautionary tale rather than the inspiring example. I laughed. Every compelling narrative needs both elements. Your journey has its own valuable lessons about recognition, regret, and reorientation. As we walked together toward the parking area, our conversation shifted to more immediate plans. My upcoming board meeting, his sailing trip along the Maine coast, our grandchildren's summer activities. The ease between us felt like a hard-won peace, more authentic than the superficial harmony of our later marriage years. When Michael called later that week to discuss an investment opportunity related to Westridge Sullivan's green energy division, I shared details of the sailing expedition with my son. "So you and Dad are actually friends now?" he asked, his tone a mixture of disbelief and cautious approval. "After everything that happened?" "I wouldn't say friends exactly," I replied thoughtfully. "We're historical colleagues who share grandchildren and significant life chapters. We've found a way to honor the valuable aspects of our shared journey while acknowledging the failures and moving forward separately. That's more evolved than most divorced couples manage," Michael observed. "Perhaps. But then, most divorces don't involve one spouse purchasing the other's company," I said, allowing myself a small smile at the absurdity of our situation. Michael laughed. "True. Your revenge was so complete that you could afford to be magnanimous afterward." "It wasn't revenge ultimately," I corrected him, though it certainly started that way. "It was reclamation of my professional capacity, my financial independence, and eventually my peace of mind. The most profound revenge, if you want to call it that, wasn't taking control of Sullivan Communications. It was discovering that I could thrive independently at an age when society expects women to quietly fade into the background. That realization, that my greatest triumph had been internal rather than external, crystallized something important about my journey. The acquisition of Sullivan Communications had been a dramatic turning point, but the true revolution had been the internal shift from defining myself in relation to Thomas to recognizing my intrinsic value and capabilities. As I approached my 77th birthday, I found myself contemplating this evolution. My calendar remained full with board meetings, investment decisions, foundation activities, and speaking engagements. The financial empire I had built continued to grow and diversify, but increasingly, my focus turned toward ensuring that the paths I had forged would remain open to others, particularly women who found themselves at similar crossroads of reinvention. The Eleanor Mitchell Second Act initiative launched on my birthday, a dedicated program within the foundation focused specifically on supporting women over 50 pursuing education, entrepreneurship, or career transitions. The announcement event, held at Northwestern University where Thomas and I had first met so many years ago, drew hundreds of attendees. Thomas attended the launch, sitting quietly in the back of the auditorium as I outlined the initiative's mission, and introduced the first cohort of participants, 20 women with diverse backgrounds and ambitious plans for their next chapters. "Age should not limit potential," I told the audience. "Experience is not a liability, but an asset when combined with the courage to evolve. Each of these women has demonstrated that courage, and this program aims to provide practical support and community connections to help them succeed." After the formal presentation, Thomas approached as I was speaking with some of the program. "Participants, congratulations, Eleanor," he said when the group dispersed. "This may be your most significant achievement yet." "Thank you," I replied, "though I doubt anything will match the dramatic flair of acquiring your company after 50 years of marriage." He laughed, acknowledging the reference to our unconventional history. "That certainly made headlines. But this initiative—" He gestured toward the women now networking enthusiastically around the room. "This creates ripples that will extend far beyond both of us. That's a profound form of legacy." As we stood together observing the energy in the room, I felt a sense of completion that had little to do with revenge or reclamation, and everything to do with transformation. Not just my own, but the potential. Transformations of countless women who would find support through the programs we had established. "Not a bad third act," I remarked. "Fourth or fifth, by my count," Thomas replied with a smile. "You've reinvented yourself several times over." "We both have," I acknowledged. "Perhaps that's the most valuable lesson in our strange, complicated story, that reinvention remains possible at any age, and that even the most painful endings can lead to unexpected new beginnings." As the event concluded and we prepared to part ways, Thomas returning to Boston, me to my Chicago penthouse, he paused. Eleanor, I've been meaning to ask, would you consider joining the advisory board for the sailing therapy program I'm developing? For cardiac patients? Your business perspective would be valuable as we structure the nonprofit. The invitation represented yet another unexpected turn in our evolving relationship. A professional collaboration based on genuine respect rather than obligation or history. I'd be happy, Thomas, I replied. Send me the details. Walking toward separate cars, we moved forward on parallel paths, connected by history but no longer bound by it, each pursuing individual purposes while finding value in occasional intersections. It wasn't the ending either of us had envisioned when we married. 53 years earlier, nor the bitter conclusion I had anticipated when he walked out. It was something more complex and ultimately more satisfying, a testament to human resilience and the endless capacity for growth, even in life's later chapters. 5 years had passed since that fateful Saturday morning when Thomas told me he was leaving our 50-year marriage. At 80, I found myself in a position that would have been unimaginable to the younger Eleanor, leading a diversified investment firm with over $500 million in assets under management, chairing multiple corporate boards, and running a foundation that had helped hundreds of women launch second careers. My penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan had become a hub for gatherings of business leaders, aspiring entrepreneurs, and foundation beneficiaries. The space that had once represented my independence now symbolized connection and community, a place where mentorship and collaboration flourished. On a crisp autumn morning, I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant interrupted with news that would set in motion yet another unexpected chapter. Ms. Mitchell, Dr. Perry from Northwestern Memorial Hospital is on the line. She says it's urgent regarding Thomas Sullivan. My stomach tightened as I took the call. Thomas and I had maintained our carefully balanced relationship over the years. Professional, collaborators, and familial connections without romantic entanglements. He had settled permanently in Boston, dividing his time between sailing adventures and work with his cardiac rehabilitation nonprofit. Our interactions were primarily through family gatherings and occasional business collaborations. Ms. Mitchell, I'm calling because you're listed as Mr. Sullivan's emergency contact, the doctor explained. He suffered a major stroke while visiting Chicago for a conference. He's stabilized, but the prognosis is uncertain. He's asking for you. I arrived at the hospital 30 minutes later, my mind racing with questions and memories. The attending physician met me in the corridor outside Thomas's room. The stroke affected his left side significantly, she explained. While he's conscious and able to communicate, he's facing a lengthy rehabilitation process. At his age, recovery will be challenging but not impossible. Thomas looked smaller somehow against the stark white hospital linens. His right hand moved slightly in acknowledgement as I entered, though the left remained motionless at his side. Eleanor, he said, his speech slightly slurred but understandable. Ironic timing. Here to give a talk on cardiac health technology. I moved to his bedside, taking his functioning hand in mine. You've always had a flair for dramatic timing. A ghost of his familiar smile crossed his face. The conference organizers are disappointed. I'm sure they are, I replied, matching his attempt at lightness while assessing his condition. Despite his effort at humor, the severity of the situation was evident in his partially immobilized face and the various monitors tracking his vital signs. Doctor says rehabilitation, he continued with effort. Months of work. Where will you do the rehabilitation? I asked. Boston? His expression clouded. My apartment. Not accessible. Stairs. Boat definitely out. The practical implications of his condition suddenly crystallized. Thomas would need significant support during his recovery, accessible housing, medical care, transportation to therapy appointments. His Boston life, centered around independence and mobility, would be impossible for the foreseeable future. You could do your rehabilitation here in Chicago, I found myself suggesting. Michael's house has that ground-floor guest suite that was designed for accessibility when his mother-in-law was ill. Thomas looked surprised. Wouldn't want to impose. Let me talk to Michael, I said. It's a practical solution, Thomas. You need support during recovery, and our family is here. The decision wasn't made lightly, but within days, arrangements were in place. Michael and Caroline readily offered their guest suite, equipped with the necessary modifications for someone with mobility challenges. Thomas would transfer to a rehabilitation center for 3 weeks of intensive therapy before moving to Michael's home for continued outpatient treatment. When I shared the plan with Samantha during our weekly video call, her reaction was measured, but supportive. It's the practical solution, she acknowledged. The Boston apartment would be impossible with his limitations, and hiring full-time care there would be isolating for him. She paused. How do you feel about having him back in Chicago, Mom? You've built a life that doesn't include Dad in close proximity. It was a fair question, one I had been asking myself since making the suggestion. Honestly, it feels like the right thing to do, I replied after consideration. Our relationship has evolved to a point where I can support him through this crisis without reopening old wounds. Besides, it's primarily Michael who will be handling the day-to-day logistics. Just be careful, Samantha advised. Crisis situations have a way of reshuffling established dynamics. Don't let yourself be pulled back into old patterns. Her concern was valid. Throughout our marriage, I had often subordinated my needs to Thomas's, a dynamic we had both acknowledged in our honest conversations of recent years. This situation, Thomas vulnerable and requiring support, could easily trigger those ingrained responses. I'm not the same woman I was 5 years ago, I assured her. Neither is your father the same man. We'll navigate this as the people we are now, not who we were then. The rehabilitation process was grueling. I visited Thomas regularly, witnessing his frustration with physical therapy exercises that challenged his lifelong self-image as capable and independent. His speech improved steadily, but the left side weakness persisted, requiring a cane and sometimes a wheelchair for longer distances. What surprised me most was Thomas's psychological resilience. Rather than raging against his limitations or withdrawing into depression, he approached rehabilitation with methodical determination. The engineer's mind that had solved complex telecommunications problems now focused on the mechanics of relearning basic movements. Neuroplasticity is fascinating, he commented during one of my visits, about 6 weeks into his recovery. The brain creating new pathways around damaged areas, like network rerouting when a node fails. I smiled at the telecommunications analogy. Always the engineer. It helps to conceptualize it technically, he admitted. Keeps me from getting overwhelmed by the emotional aspects. As his medical condition stabilized, Thomas began to engage more with the world beyond his recovery. He joined virtual board meetings for his nonprofit, though with a reduced role. More surprisingly, he expressed interest in the current projects at Mitchell Holdings, offering insights on telecommunications trends that proved valuable for several investment decisions. You should formalize his advisory role, Barbara suggested during one of our strategy sessions. His technical expertise complements our financial analysis, especially for the telecom portfolio. The suggestion made sense from a business perspective, but I hesitated, conscious of maintaining appropriate boundaries in our evolving relationship. After consideration, I proposed a limited consulting arrangement that would provide Thomas with intellectual stimulation during his recovery while keeping our interaction professionally structured. To my surprise, the arrangement flourished. Thomas's technical insights, combined with his historical perspective on industry evolution, brought valuable depth to our investment analysis. Working remotely from Michael's home, he reviewed technical specifications and market trends, providing assessment reports that informed our decision-making without directly involving him in company operations. 6 months into his recovery, Thomas had progressed to walking with a cane for shorter distances, though the wheelchair remained necessary for longer outings. His speech had returned to normal, and the cognitive impacts of the stroke had proven minimal. However, it was becoming clear that he would not regain full mobility or independence. During a family dinner at Michael's home, Thomas raised the question of his future living arrangements. "I need to make decisions," he said, looking around the table at Michael, Caroline, and me. "The Boston apartment lease ends next month. Realistically, I can't return to that independent lifestyle." "You're welcome to stay here as long as needed," Michael assured him. "The suite works well for your needs." Thomas nodded gratefully but continued. "I've been considering a retirement community with graduated care options. There's an excellent facility near here that offers independent apartments with accessibility features and additional services available as needs increase." The suggestion was pragmatic and forward-thinking, acknowledging both his current limitations and potential future needs. It represented a level of personal acceptance that impressed me, given his previously independent lifestyle. "I'd like to visit it with you," I offered, "if you'd like a second perspective." The Lakeside Senior Living community exceeded my expectations. Located on Chicago's North Shore, it offered elegant apartments with subtle accessibility features, extensive gardens, and a range of amenities from fine dining to an impressive library. Most importantly, it provided a continuum of care options as residents' needs changed over time. "It's not a sailing vessel on the Maine coast," Thomas observed as we toured the grounds, "but it has its own appeal." "The lakefront location offers water views," I pointed out. "Different from the ocean, but still beautiful." He nodded, watching a sailboat in the distance. Life rarely follows our carefully plotted courses. 2 weeks later, Thomas moved into a one-bedroom apartment at Lakeside. Michael and I helped with the transition, arranging for furniture to be shipped from his Boston storage unit, and setting up the space to accommodate his mobility needs while maintaining his personal style. "It feels strange," he admitted as we prepared to leave after helping him settle in. "Starting over at 80, in a place I never expected to be." "You've always been adaptable," I reminded him, "and you're not starting entirely from scratch. Your family is here, your professional connections are intact, and you've already established a local medical team who understands your needs." He smiled wryly. "True, and having you nearby provides a strange continuity, despite everything." With Thomas permanently settled in Chicago, our carefully distant relationship necessarily evolved. We found ourselves attending the same professional events, family gatherings, and occasionally collaborating on foundation initiatives where his technical expertise complemented my financial approach. 6 months after his move to Lakeside, Thomas surprised me with an unexpected proposal during one of our regular foundation meetings. "I've been thinking about leveraging my technical background for the Second Act initiative," he began. "Many women returning to the workforce or launching businesses need stronger digital skills. I could develop a specialized curriculum focusing on technical fundamentals for non-technical professionals." The suggestion had merit. Many of our program participants struggled with technological aspects of their ventures, particularly those re-entering the workforce after extended absences. "That could be valuable," I acknowledged. "We'd need to structure it carefully to ensure it addresses their specific needs rather than overwhelming them with technical details." "Of course," he agreed. "Practice-oriented, not theory-heavy. Focused on applications and problem-solving relevant to their ventures." We spent the next hour outlining a potential program structure, a series of workshops combined with one-on-one coaching sessions tailored to participants' specific business needs. Thomas's enthusiasm was evident as he sketched potential learning modules on my office whiteboard, his engineering mind breaking complex concepts into accessible components. As our discussion concluded, he hesitated before adding, There's another reason I'm interested in this project. It would give me a meaningful purpose beyond my recovery. Something constructive to build, even with my physical limitations. The vulnerability in his admission touched me. Thomas had always defined himself through achievement and contribution. The stroke had taken not just his physical capabilities, but a fundamental element of his identity. The foundation would be fortunate to have your expertise, I told him. And I think many of our participants would benefit greatly from your perspective. The Technical Empowerment Program launched 3 months later, with an inaugural cohort of 15 women from diverse professional backgrounds. Thomas approached the curriculum development with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized his engineering work, creating learning pathways that addressed specific business challenges through targeted technical solutions. What none of us anticipated was how powerfully the participants would respond to Thomas's own story of reinvention. His willingness to discuss his stroke and subsequent rebuilding of his life created an authentic connection that transcended the technical content. It's remarkable, Barbara observed after sitting in on one of the workshop sessions. He's sharing his vulnerability in a way I never saw during his corporate leadership days. It makes the technical material much more accessible because they see him as a fellow traveler on the journey of reinvention. Thomas flourished in this new role, his confidence growing as he witnessed the impact of his teaching. The physical limitations remained. He still required a cane and sometimes the wheelchair, but they had become simply one aspect of his identity rather than its defining feature. Our professional collaboration inevitably led to more frequent personal interaction. We began sharing occasional meals before or after foundation events, our conversations expanding beyond business to include books, current events, and philosophical reflections on aging and purpose. During one such dinner, nearly 2 years after his stroke, Thomas brought up a topic we had carefully avoided. "I've been wanting to thank you, Eleanor," he said as we finished our meal at a quiet restaurant near the foundation offices. "Not just for the professional opportunities or the practical support after my stroke, but for something more fundamental." I looked at him questioningly. "You showed me a different way to approach the later chapters of life," he continued. "When I left our marriage, I was grasping for youth and novelty, terrified of aging and irrelevance. I thought a younger partner and a fresh start would somehow reset the clock." He smiled ruefully. "It was a profound misunderstanding of what gives life meaning." "And what does life mean, in your current view?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective after all he had experienced. Connection, contribution, growth that acknowledges limitations rather than denying them. He met my eyes directly. "You demonstrated that with how you transformed after our separation. Not by trying to be younger or different, but by fully claiming your capabilities and wisdom. It's a lesson I wish I had learned without causing so much pain in the process." The acknowledgement was unexpectedly moving, not because I had sought his validation, but because it reflected a genuine evolution in his understanding. "Life rarely offers straight paths to wisdom," I replied. "We all reach understanding through our own circuitous routes." As we left the restaurant, Thomas paused under the streetlight, leaning slightly on his cane. "Would you consider joining me for the symphony next weekend? The Chicago Symphony is performing Dvořák's New World Symphony." The invitation hung between us, clearly personal rather than professional, yet not explicitly romantic. I found myself considering it without the automatic rejection I might have felt in earlier years. "I'd enjoy that," I responded, surprising myself with the ease of my acceptance. The symphony evening marked a subtle shift in our relationship. Not a rekindling of romance, but the emergence of a genuine friendship built on shared history, mutual respect, and recognition of how significantly we had both changed. In the months that followed, we established a comfortable rhythm of shared activities, concerts, lectures, occasional dinners, and family gatherings, while maintaining our separate lives and homes. The arrangement raised eyebrows among those who knew our history, but we found ourselves increasingly unconcerned with external perceptions. People expect neat narratives, Thomas observed after one foundation event where our comfortable interaction had prompted curious glances. Villain and victim, tragedy or triumph, reconciliation or permanent estrangement. Reality is messier and more interesting. Especially at our age, I agreed. We've lived long enough to recognize that relationships evolve in ways that defy simple categorization. As I approached my 82nd birthday, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 7 years. From the devastating end of my marriage, to the triumphant acquisition of Sullivan Communications, to the unexpected development of a new, more authentic connection with Thomas, the path had been anything but predictable. My professional accomplishments continued to expand. Mitchell Holdings had grown into a respected investment firm with a particular focus on women-led ventures and healthcare innovation. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation had supported over 500 women in launching second careers, with an impressive success rate that had drawn national attention. Yet increasingly, I found myself valuing personal growth more than professional achievements. I had discovered capacities for reinvention, resilience, and forgiveness that the younger Eleanor, even the Eleanor of 7 years ago, could not have imagined. On my birthday, Thomas joined me for a small celebration at my penthouse, along with Michael, Caroline, and their children. As we gathered on the terrace overlooking the lake, Thomas proposed a toast. "To Eleanor," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us all that life's most profound chapters can begin at any age, and that our greatest strengths often emerge from our deepest challenges." Later, as the evening wound down and the others had departed, Thomas lingered, watching the moonlight on the lake from my terrace. "I've been thinking about something," he said, his voice thoughtful. "If you could go back and change how everything unfolded, prevent me from leaving, avoid all the pain and upheaval, would you?" I considered the question carefully, looking out at the silver path of moonlight stretching across the dark water. "No," I answered finally. As painful as that time was, it catalyzed a transformation that might never have happened otherwise. I discovered parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. I built something meaningful that has helped hundreds of other women find their own strength. Those outcomes are worth the difficult journey. He nodded slowly. I've come to the same conclusion, though from a different angle. My choices caused tremendous pain, yet ultimately led to growth I couldn't have achieved otherwise. It's a complex reckoning, acknowledging the harm while recognizing the eventual good that emerged from it. We stood in comfortable silence, two people in their 80s contemplating the strange, winding paths that had brought them to this moment of understanding. Life gives us second acts we never anticipated, I observed. And third and fourth acts, too, if we remain open to them. Thomas smiled, leaning slightly on his cane as he turned toward me. That's the most valuable lesson in our complicated story, isn't it? That reinvention remains possible at any age, that even painful endings can lead to unexpected new beginnings, and that the capacity for growth never really diminishes if we have the courage to embrace it. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "I've been invited to speak at a cardiac rehabilitation conference in Boston next month. Would you consider joining me? We could visit Samantha and her family while we're there." The invitation represented yet another evolution in our relationship, a comfortable companionship that acknowledged our separate lives while finding value in shared experiences. "I'd like that," I replied. "It would be good to see Boston again." After Thomas departed, I returned to the terrace alone, contemplating the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment. 7 years earlier, devastated by betrayal, I had channeled my hurt and anger into a dramatic act of corporate acquisition that many viewed as the ultimate revenge. Yet that revenge had launched a transformation far more profound than simply evening the score. It had initiated a journey of self-discovery, professional fulfillment, and eventually an unexpected form of reconciliation that defied conventional narratives about relationships after betrayal. As I looked out over the city lights reflecting on Lake Michigan, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for all of it, the pain that had awakened me, the challenges that had strengthened me, and the unexpected turns that had led me to discoveries about myself and others that might otherwise have remained hidden. At 82, I found myself not at the conclusion of my story, but still in the midst of it. Still learning, still contributing, still open to the possibility that life's most meaningful chapters might yet lie ahead. And that, perhaps, was the most surprising and gratifying revenge of all, not against Thomas, but against the limitations I had once accepted for myself and the narrowing expectations society held for women of a certain age. The company I had acquired in anger had ultimately helped free me from constraints far more significant than Thomas's betrayal, the invisible bonds of diminished expectations and untapped potential that had shaped so much of my earlier life. In reaching for revenge, I had inadvertently grasped something far more valuable: liberation, purpose, and the profound satisfaction of finally becoming fully myself. 10 years had passed since that fateful morning when Thomas told me our 50-year marriage was over. At 85, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary decade that had transformed not just my circumstances, but my understanding of life itself. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation had become my primary focus, having helped over 1,000 women launch second careers across the country. Mitchell Holdings continued to thrive under capable leadership, though I had gradually reduced my direct involvement to focus on mentorship and strategic guidance rather than day-to-day operations. Thomas, now 87, had adapted remarkably to his post-stroke life. While he still used a cane and occasionally a wheelchair for longer outings, he had developed a full and meaningful existence centered around his technical education program at the foundation, his relationships with our growing family, and our unexpected friendship. The symposium celebrating the Foundation's 10th anniversary brought together beneficiaries, business leaders, and supporters from across the country. As I took the stage to deliver the opening address, I surveyed the audience. Hundreds of women whose lives had been touched by programs that had emerged from my own journey of reinvention. 10 years ago, I found myself at a crossroads that many would consider the end of a story rather than the beginning, I began. At 75, after my 50-year marriage ended unexpectedly, conventional wisdom suggested I should quietly accept this diminished version of life. Instead, I discovered that our greatest chapters often begin precisely when we think the story is over. The keynote speaker for the event was Andrea Flores, the founder of Health Vision AI, now a groundbreaking healthcare technology company that had transformed early disease detection in underserved communities. My initial investment in her venture had grown exponentially, both financially and in terms of lives impacted. Eleanor didn't just provide capital, Andrea told the audience. She provided a powerful example of what's possible when we refuse to accept artificial limitations based on age or gender. Her support came at a moment when traditional investors were suggesting I step aside for a male CEO. Her belief in my vision, and in me as the right leader for that vision, made all the difference. The evening concluded with the announcement of the Eleanor Mitchell Legacy Fund, a $50 million endowment ensuring the foundation's work would continue for generations. As champagne flowed and success stories were shared, I found myself momentarily overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had emerged from that painful turning point a decade earlier. Thomas joined me on the terrace as I stepped out for a quiet moment of reflection. "Quite a legacy," he observed, nodding toward the celebration inside. "One I never anticipated," I acknowledged. "Strange how life's most devastating moments can lead to its greatest gifts." He was silent for a moment before responding. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About how my worst decision, leaving our marriage the way I did, eventually catalyzed something remarkable. Not just your success, but my own reckoning with what truly matters. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of our great-granddaughter, 6-year-old Ellie, named in my honor. She bounded onto the terrace with the limitless energy of childhood. "Great-Grandma Eleanor, they're about to cut the cake with your picture on it." Thomas smiled at her enthusiasm. "You should go claim your moment, Eleanor. It's well-deserved." The following week brought a development neither of us had anticipated. Michael called with news that Westridge Sullivan, the merged telecommunications company that had once been the center of our corporate drama, was being considered for acquisition by a global technology conglomerate. "They want to meet with both of you," Michael explained. "As the founder and the former controlling shareholder who orchestrated its modern direction, it's largely ceremonial, but they're framing it as honoring the company's heritage before taking it global." Thomas and I exchanged glances across my living room where we'd gathered to receive Michael's call. The prospect of returning together to the corporate battlefield, where our personal and professional lives had so dramatically collided a decade earlier, felt strangely symbolic. "Full circle," Thomas murmured after Michael ended the call. "Indeed," I agreed. Though neither of us are the same people who started that particular circle. The meeting took place in the gleaming headquarters of what had once been Sullivan Communications. As we were escorted through the executive floor, I noted how little remained of the company's original character. The corporate evolution had been thorough, erasing most traces of both Thomas's founding vision and my brief but transformative leadership. The acquiring company's executives were respectfully attentive, asking thoughtful questions about the company's founding principles and the technological innovations that had established its early success. When the conversation turned to the merger and subsequent corporate direction, they directed their questions to me. "Ms. Mitchell, your acquisition and strategic pivot are still taught as a case study at business schools," the CEO remarked. "What insights guided your decision to refocus the company so dramatically toward next-generation infrastructure?" "Recognize that honoring the company's legacy didn't mean preserving its exact form," I replied, "but rather ensuring its continued relevance in a changing landscape. Sometimes the most respectful way to treat something valuable is to allow it to evolve rather than remain static." Thomas nodded beside me, adding, "Eleanor saw what I resisted acknowledging. That meaningful legacy isn't about maintaining control, but about creating something resilient enough to thrive beyond our direct involvement." As we left the building, together, a photographer from the business press captured our departure. The founder and the woman who had once taken his company, now walking side by side as respected elders of an industry they had both helped shape. "Strange to think," Thomas mused as our car pulled away, "that without our personal upheaval, none of this would have unfolded as it did. The company might have stagnated under my direction. You might never have launched the foundation. I might never have confronted my own limitations. Life rarely offers straight paths to wisdom," I replied, echoing words I had spoken years earlier. "The most valuable journeys often begin with unexpected detours." That evening, surrounded by 4 generations of our family at Michael's home, I looked around the dinner table with a profound sense of completion. The revenge I had once sought had transformed into something far more meaningful than mere retribution. It had become a catalyst for growth, purpose, and ultimately, a deeper understanding of life's capacity for renewal at any age. As Thomas proposed a toast to our expanding family, our eyes met briefly across the table, acknowledging the extraordinary journey that had brought us from betrayal through vengeance to this unexpected place of mutual respect and genuine affection. Not a reconciliation in the conventional sense, but something perhaps more valuable. A hard-won wisdom about life's capacity for continual reinvention and the liberation that comes from finally becoming fully ourselves. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.